So, hi everyone, welcome back to another Breaking into Tech Community AMA. Today we have Zachary Smith. Zach is a Flutter developer for Loop Messenger, and before he was a developer, he served in the military for 13 years, most recently as a pilot. So, thank you again for taking the to participate in this, Zach. Can you talk to us about your transition from the military into tech, and why was it mobile development first?
Yeah. First, thanks for having me on here and reaching out. There's a lot of really great people before me, so go ahead and make sure you go back and check out what you guys have already done because that's what I did, and it's pretty cool. So a little bit about my background. Actually, I started in the Army, went over to the Navy, became a pilot, um, flown around a whole bunch, a lot of all over the world. So my story is really interesting and probably the same as a lot of people's. But as far as military goes and flying, about a year and a half ago, I found out I couldn't fly anymore. Have some health issues, more directly mental health issues. Kind of a culmination of events happened and took me to the sidelines from flying. And if you can't fly, you're not a very good pilot. So the military has kind of been like, okay, well, you can't fly, and there's a few other things going on with that, but eventually they're like, all right, well, we're gonna discharge you. So I've been lucky enough to be in that process for a really long time, and the military has been very graceful to let me figure out what to do next while still having some sort of paycheck and stability. So in that instance, I'm probably really unique, where I could kind of dive into programming more than just late at night like some people do. Um, so I sat down. So after I kind of found that out, I was a little like, well, what next? As I'm sure, I think there's a lot of people out there who they're kind of in a similar situation, whether it's because they can't do something. I have some really good friends who they just can't sustain the job they're at for one reason or another. So I reached out. I have a brother who works for a big tech company, and I have a dad who has been, I would say he's like the OG of self-taught programming. So his major and master's was in chemistry a long, long time ago. And then he started programming when you're still like punching cards into a computer to program. Like,
Whoa, that's crazy.
yeah, yeah. I remember when I was little going into one of his companies and seeing like the whole server room, like big, huge computers lined up through the whole room. So at that time, I had no idea what that was, but he was completely self-taught, and he still is. Like, and he's like, yeah, I read books, and so he pointed me in the direction kind of towards .NET, I think, with Microsoft, and then my brother, he pointed me in the direction. So I'm a big Apple guy. I kind of always have been, and he pointed me to Swift Playgrounds. If you're not familiar, that's just an app on the iPad. It's kind of like a game. My 7-year-old, 6-year-old, we sit down and play with it. But it just teaches you the basics. I mean, really just functions, loops, things like that.
And that's interesting. Like most people start in web development rather than
Yeah,
mobile, but I guess if that was an easy thing to play with, maybe that's why it was such a
yeah,
good introduction for you.
yeah. Well, and like at the time, so when I say I started from scratch, like nothing. Like I had no idea what HTML was. Like I was not one of those guys who like edited their MySpace to look really cool. Like I'm talking like bare minimum, no programming knowledge at all.
Your dad didn't
Uh,
force you to learn anything growing up.
no, no. And so, the benefit of being a pilot and going through the Navy flight school is it teaches you how to become a really, really, really good learner. I had to know a lot of technical stuff, but none of it to do with programming, right? But I had to know electrical systems, hydraulic systems, all the airplane systems. But when it came to like software engineering, like I really started out at nothing. So when I looked at Swift Playgrounds, I didn't really know what Swift was, what HTML, CS. Like I thought it was all just the same. Like I didn't understand. Like now I understand there's a huge difference between almost everything. But yeah, so I started there. I did that for a little bit, and I kind of picked up on it. I'm like, oh, I could probably do this. Still, again, very very ignorant. So I got on Udemy. That's a great resource. Some people make fun of it because you always start a course but you never finish it. Um, yeah, But I did a course on there halfway through. I ordered, or probably at the very beginning, I ordered a book on Swift from Nerd Ranch, I think is what it's called, and read a whole book. I learned really well with reading. I've learned I can remember stuff. Read through that whole book of Swift, did a few courses, and about by the time like I could sit down and kind of just generate code on my own and make small apps, I realized like the biggest step for me, I think, out of all this was like I went to someone and said, "I want to build you something. What do you want built?"
That's
One
power.
that yeah, yeah, I tell people like you need to start building and like making clones of things is really neat, but you need to take it a step further. So either make a clone of something and then add features you want fixed and make it your own, or just do something completely different because like anyone can follow a tutorial. And if you've ever been on the hiring side of things, I think if you see someone who's just followed tutorials and have really basic stuff, like, oh well, you've done what everyone else has done, which is a good base. But so for me, I'm like, well, I just want to start making stuff. I want to start figuring this out because that's the applicability. So yeah, so I went to a gym I go to. I went to the gym owner, super awesome guy. He is just like me. We know nothing about tech, and I said, hey man, I want to make you an app. What do you want? And he told me a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, I know the iPhone can do that, so yeah, I could probably make that. I didn't know how much I was biting off. The basis of it was like make a QR scanner that can scan some QR codes, play some videos in the app, add some group chats, adds a way to log workouts. Just like really basic gym stuff that's in the basic app.
But not basic to make. Yeah.
but not, but I like, but then I didn't know enough. I'm like, yeah, dude, I'll get that back to you in a few weeks. That'll be fun. It took way more than a few weeks, but he was very graceful, and we've had a really long timeline. So this was in Swift and iOS, and it taught me a ton because now I had to really like, figure out how an app worked and not just making some demo apps here and there and how to dive into some stuff. And you're applying that knowledge.
And did you do this for
Um,
free for him, or did you like come up with a
yes.
price?
So initially it's like, hey, I'll develop it for free. I'm not a fan of working for free, but I am a fan of working for value. So sometimes people are like, I will never work for free for a company. But if you're getting value from that, that is more than a paycheck in some instances.
Because I imagine it, I mean, it's not only a project, but you can get actual statistics from it to put onto your
Yeah,
resume.
yeah, and that. So one, it has taught me and is still teaching me because I'm actually trying to scale it into a small business from what it's come from. Two, like that is like actionable. So what I actually did is I created an LLC and wrapped what I was doing in a small company and made myself an employee of that company. So one, it was legitimate, which is important, but two, like I'm now an employee of a company, and I don't know if that's a hack of getting experience.
I
Um,
mean,
but hopefully no one who hired me is watching. I think they might be, but
well, some
uh,
recruiters, it's kind of crazy. Like, the recruiters that reach out to you aren't always like knowledgeable about tech or
mhm,
development, so they just see numbers. Like, I've had a recruiter call and be like, "Oh, you only have a year of experience. We are looking for 3." And they don't
yeah,
recognize that years of experience doesn't mean technical knowledge. It doesn't equate.
yeah,
So the
yeah,
fact that you figured out that hack where you could basically make projects and learn,
yeah,
but also say this is production experience, I
yeah,
think that was really smart.
yeah. And so early on, to kind of go back. So getting into tech, so I said I knew nothing. I started listening to every podcast I could, watching YouTube videos. I mean, I was at the gym, either listening to a podcast or on the treadmill or bike and watching YouTube tutorials. Like I would say any for a good few months, like every moment I possibly could. I was trying to bring in it and trying to understand the community, the culture, and what it would actually take. Because like I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, and there's a lot of stories of like I've applied a ton of places, 200, 300 applications, and I still can't get a job. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. So, and I haven't. And we can talk. I think we can talk more about like what I think actually brings more success than just shooting out hundreds of applications, which does work, but that's painful.
Yeah, I
Um,
definitely have some questions about your thoughts on that
yeah,
process.
yeah, but so I developed this app. I showed it to him. He's like, awesome. Can I get on Android? Like, of course. That's the first question. I assume would be the first question anyone would ask if they're trying to get an app made for them. And so one of my mentors early on, he works with my brother. He told me about Swift and Flutter. Those are like the only two languages that I thought existed for a little bit. Other than like, I knew there's something called HTML, right? So in between this time, I started looking into Flutter because I knew that was cross-platform. And then there's a school. So I'm from Utah. If if you guys know, it's in the west part of the United States. Um, there's a school called Dev Mountain, and they have and this was a really crucial learning point for me. They have an intro class for $50, and I'm not advertising for them, but if they're listening, it really was a good course. So for $50 is a basic intro to HTML, CSS, and JS. And I think it was 2 months long, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I think Saturday, 1 or 2 hours every night. Like pretty good value with an instructor for $50. Actually, probably the best thing I've ever seen as far as boot camp style learning goes for $50. Um,
Did you feel like it was much better than like online courses that you looked at?
yeah, so this is why I say this was like really crucial of me and where I was at. So I've been self-taught up until then. I took the course. So I had taken a little bit from Angela Yu with HTML, CSS, and JS just because I wanted to get an idea. Because most of the podcasts I listen to all have to do with web development, and I wasn't doing any web development. So I'm like, am I missing out? Do I need to get into web development? So I took a little bit from Angela, and then I took this class, and it was really, really good. I think nothing replaces having an instructor you can actually ask questions, like hands down. But the format of the class and what they were teaching was exactly the same as what I was seeing online, either self-taught or through like YouTube, Udemy. And so that really solidified to me that like, oh, I can do this self-taught route because there's enough resources, and then I can create a network of people I can ask questions and build things off of that way. So that course gave me a really good foundation in just basic web design, so I could build that understanding, but then also push me back to like, okay, I like doing mobile stuff. I don't like doing web stuff. But it was really good because it let me know where I was at. It's kind of a good check of like, hey, are these courses that I'm taking really doing the same stuff? And it seemed like they all had the same kind of format, the same presentation. So it gave me a better feeling of doing the self-taught route. I was trying to save money. I'm really cheap, and I at the time I had enough time on my hands. I'm like, I can dedicate to sit here and learn.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
$50 is much cheaper than paying for a boot camp and then finding out that maybe you could have done it
yeah,
self-taught or with
yeah,
finding connections for mentorship.
yeah. And with Dev Mountain, I don't know if those exist other places, but I think that was really cool because it was allowing people to get their foot in the door and test it out. And like we built a very basic, um, I think it's still on my code pen. It's still up. It looks like it's from MySpace. A very basic, just like landing page for like a shopping site, and you can click items, add it to the cart, stuff like that. But it went through all that and taught us, and just to get that basic understanding and see, and then compare that to other courses I was taking. I'm like, oh man, like okay, like I can do this. The value there is obviously like I had a really good teacher. She actually still talks to me even after, and I bounce ideas after her. Like that's irreplaceable. And so with that kind of stuff, I see some really good value. But it also, I was like, okay, I can self teach myself. So,
And at this point, had you learned Git at all? Had you touched Git?
oh man, yeah. So I knew GitHub existed when I was with Swift. There's like Cocoa Pods, and there's pulling things from GitHub and cloning, and I sucked at it. It never worked. And then I got into Flutter, and there's packages. So I could bring stuff off of GitHub, but I'd say for like the first 9 months, like GitHub, pushing, branching, polling, basically it was just like a mystery to me, because
I
I
heard
was
that's
really,
true for a lot of people starting out as
yeah,
well.
I was working I was working by myself, or like there's a guy I was working with on a contract basis, but he would zip drop he'd zip his files, drop them to me. I'd fix them, zip them back, and send them to him. So, because I don't think he knew how to use GitHub, and so that's how. So like it allowed me to kind of skirt that. Um, and then actually, I'm a little embarrassed, but the company I work for now, one of the first times I had to do a pull request, they were very gracious to give me some good guidelines and tips. And when I was hired with them, I was very straightforward and honest, which is huge for. I can talk about some different instances where that's paid off big for me. I said, hey, like, you guys might have to help me with some of the stuff that, like, I just haven't been on a team of developers, and they knew that with me coming in, and they've been really gracious and really able to teach me while I do the work. And then some of the outliers, those outlying skills um, that are easy to ignore because it's not the meat and potatoes of programming, which
You're
it really is. But
you definitely are not the only one. I think Lizzie has also mentioned that during her first job was when she
yeah,
learned Git.
yeah.
Um,
I think sometimes I will like just delete files and re-pull it from the GitHub online instead of like so I was doing some stuff that like it worked, but man, it was the hard way and the long way for sure. Um but yeah, like Czech just said, like GitHub is a world of its own and it's a completely different skill. Um but it's a very useful tool once they're with the company I use now, how they use it, like it makes work really nice and a lot easier. So
yeah, I think I would definitely suggest people learn that as one of the first things that they
yeah,
learn because it will make your life so
yeah.
much easier.
I mean, and like you can really sit down in just a few days. I mean, or even a day, and just if there's some really good material out there on YouTube, and it just walks you through what everything is, how to do it, and then if you just do your own kind of like fake projects, like you can really learn it. It doesn't take a long time. It just, for me, it was like, well, no, I need to learn how to program, and Git will come eventually. And
It's not the funnest part. It's not a
no,
visual like thing that you can see most of the time.
you know, but I remember an interview, and this is when I wish like I should have learned this better. So with one of my mentors, we talked. I told him what I was doing, and he's like, okay, well, do you want a job? What do you want? And I'm like, I want an internship. He's like, okay. And he set up interviews for me. And I went through this whole process with their company. And I kind of was like, okay, this guy knows where I'm at. He set this up. Like, I didn't think it was a done deal, but I was like, I'll be really shocked if I don't get this position. And I kind of was relying that on that position to kind of launch me. And one of the guys, and I connected with him after, and we talked a little bit. He's awesome. But he asked me, like, well, tell me about GitHub and Git and like the process. And if you think of a pull request, I thought of a pull request of like I'm requesting to pull information to my computer, and that's not quite what it is. And so I explained it, and it was completely wrong, and I didn't even know. I just was like, yeah, I'm not quite sure, but this is what I think everything is. And you could tell he's like, ah, dang it, like you don't know what GitHub is, you don't know what Git is. And I didn't get the position. I'm not sure if that was the only reason, but it's probably one of them. And that was really, really hard. But then it was a good assessment of like, okay, well, there's some of these things I've just completely dropped that someone in a traditional education or a boot camp would know. So that was a good gut check for me. And then it was also very disappointing, which I think everyone experiences because these are people who I who knew where I was at and said, yeah, let's get you on our team as an intern. And then I've overlooked some kind of crucial areas. Um, but it happened, and then that was in Swift, and then after that I focused more on Flutter, and I've kind of been running with that. So yeah,
Just to shout out LR or IR, I can't tell if it's an IRL, Passion. They say that they're actually doing the free full stack engineering bootcamp by Leon. I don't know if you saw the 100 devs stuff that's going around Twitter. I think that's awesome. I don't think that you have to spend so much money on a boot camp. I know that that's helpful to
yeah.
a lot of people. I think it's better to find a mentor and do self-taught or doing something cool like
Yeah.
100 devs is awesome. I think that's a
You
really
know,
cool initiative.
yeah, 100 devs is really cool. There's another one on LinkedIn. It's called it's Dev 30, I think. I follow him on LinkedIn. There's some really cool stuff out there. So I had this conversation actually with my wife this morning. So I'm really big in the startup scene. I think there's some really cool things. Um, Lorraine. Cool. I really think there's some really cool startups out there and some really neat. So I've been in like the same business. I haven't had to look for a job since I was 17 because I've been in the military. But there's some really cool stuff going on out there. It really interests me. And I'll talk to some guys who like they have a degree in this. This is what they've been doing, and they are so good. And you can still get to that point. But then here I am as like a self-taught guy thinking like so there's no shortcuts. Like short story, there's no shortcuts to knowing how to be a good programmer. I think you can be self-taught, and or you can do like boot camps, and you can break in. But like 4 year degree is 4 years of studying. 4 years of self study is 4 years of self studying, and so sometimes I feel like that's glossed over a little bit. Like maybe you don't need a 4 year degree, but they've spent 4 years learning,
Yeah.
and it's not the degree, it's the learning, and that was kind of like I had to sit back and be like, okay, I can get into tech, I'm in tech, I'm getting paid, but to be an expert, going back to as a pilot, it took me years, and sometimes I think I lose that, and I think because there's so many people out there pushing like you can do this, like it is
Yeah, they'll
hard.
be like, "Oh, I
It
did
takes
this in less than a year." There's so
yeah
many stories like that.
yeah, and like mine was pretty. I think by the time like I picked up I picked up Swift Playgrounds till I was getting paid was like a few months, but it wasn't full time. Um, and I also had a lot more time dedicated. There's a lot of circumstances around why or why not. Um, and so I think people. I think one of the questions was like, "Do you have any setbacks?" Like, of course. And anyone who says, "Hey, I did this in 9 months," like it still doesn't mean it was easy. Um, with the tech community, it is awesome, but it's all on social media, and I think there's a lot of real people, but we like to share success.
Yeah, and
You
not the
know,
failures.
yeah, and not the failures. Like, and I have had a lot of failures. I mean, just in the last year alone, I could, from how my exit to leaving the military with mental health, like completely blindsided me and my family. And I felt like the biggest failure. I mean, I went from being like a top instructor with what I was doing, thousands of hours, flying all over, to like literally being in a mental health facility. But people don't talk about that. I don't even really like to talk about it, but like that's real. And then like there are days where like I just don't think I can do it. Like like there's days when I want to email my boss like, hey man, you should probably just fire me now because I'm gonna ruin your company or like. And so I think it's being like that realistic perspective. Like if you're self-taught, if you're going through a boot camp, like there's no shortcuts. Like there are streamlined ways to learn. And I think that's what self-taught and boot camps are. They're streamlined because you're focusing on like the field you want to get into, vice where like a degree is more broad. But there's no shortcuts to just being a good like programmer and other than just getting better every single day. Um,
Yeah, and
so
I would also say every university is different. So I know
mhm.
software engineers from Mississippi State University, um, and they weren't taught some of the things that you might learn in boot camp,
Yeah,
like Git or just some basic programming knowledge that you kind of
yeah,
need before your first job. So it's kind of a give and take of what you learn
yeah.
there.
And it's all getting better. That's what's cool too. So like boot camps are getting better. Self teach like I think if I tried to teach myself how to program when my dad did it, where like here was like true self, I just couldn't have like there's
Absolutely
no
not.
way, But now like just from the tools we use to the resources out there, like it is so accessible. I mean, it doesn't mean it's easy. It'll be hard, but like that, and that's what like. That's what hooked me, is there's so much out there, and there's so many people who are advocating for people to do it and helping them along the way. Like that is like, because when I first started, I'm like, I just need a job. I think I can learn this because I can learn hard stuff. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I really like this. There's some really cool people. I'm not getting yelled at, like that kind of stuff. And that's what kept me. That's what's kept me going.
Yeah, I
Um,
was just thinking, I was like, how, you know, did you handle the stress of the tech industry? But I just thought about it. You came from the military,
yeah,
so it's a little less stressful, huh?
it isn't. It isn't. So, yeah, like so as a pilot, sometimes I'm flying. Like I had experiences where like I look out my window and my engine's on fire. And that's life or death stress, and that's a little different. Um, but I think we induce our own stress pretty well. I know I do. Whether it's just trying to finish something or learn, like for me, it's like I feel like I can't ever learn fast enough. And I taught there. I have a few really good friends who they're trying to learn how to program to better their lives, and I feel like they feel the same way of like, and they're stressed because they don't feel like they're going to be able to get out of their situation and get better. Um, and so for me, that's where the stress comes. Is like, self doubt. I don't feel like I can learn it good well enough, or like with Flutter specifically, it's really easy to like front end design stuff. It's a really good language for that. But then I get really stressed when like I have to think about like getting any deeper, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
There's just so
but
much. The breadth of what you can learn is so
it's huge.
huge
It's
that
huge.
it's daunting and it's stressful.
Yeah, yeah, and I think if you look big picture, like it's overwhelming. I think with anything. And so what I've done, and what I encourage people, and people taught me is like just like 1% at a time. Like today I'm gonna get 1% better. Tomorrow I'm gonna get 1% better, and over a year that's 364% better. Like,
Yeah.
and that's how I've taken it is like, and when I get stuck on one day, so I'm building something right now, and I'm trying to customize out a slider to match a Figma. That's what I've been doing with my company, and that slider has frustrated me so bad. And yesterday I'm like, I just can't do this. Like I wanted to quit coding over like just a UI display, like which is ridiculous. But I woke up this morning and like it just clicked. And with tech, like that keeps me going because like that has happened so much, and things like there's no magic to coding. It's all logic, and if you're persistent enough, like the logic works itself out.
This
Um,
is a more technical question, I guess, about your slider situation, because I've done a
mhm.
little bit of Flutter, and I've also been in the
Yeah.
situation of UX designers want this, but Flutter widgets are mainly like we're using material design, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's where you should start in Flutter most of
Yeah.
the time. So did you start from a material design widget, or did you just do like a blank widget? I know that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So I actually did both to see which would work better. So the widget class is, oh, it's just a like a slider class, a slide, and then in there you can wrap it with a slider theme, and then you can literally change everything. So I played around with that. There's a class called the slider tick mark shape. Ooh, so I'm trying to all the little ticks, trying to customize them, and then the line. And I actually went in there, and then I just created my own custom class of that, and that's been my solution. And you can go in, um, because it's open source, and you can go into those widgets. It makes it really customizable. So you can go, and it takes a little work, a lot of reading, but then I can go in and use the paint, and that's where and control exactly how the pixels are broken out, and so it worked pretty well. But I also because I so the widgets are just like they're just codes. I wanted to figure out how the widget was built, so I actually built it from scratch as well. I just made a container, put a gesture recognizer in it, and then put paint in there and drew a line out, and then just had it report on the axis where it was at the whole time, and basically just built the slider out from scratch as well. And then once I started looking at the code, I'm like, oh, well, I just built from scratch what Flutter already did for me. So then I just went and used what they made. It was a similar process, a little bit different, um, but that was good for me because it made me understand what it was and how it was working, instead of just inputting it. Because with Flutter, you can just put in widgets and you don't have to know how they work, and it's really great. Um, but sometimes I like to go back, and I've been really interested in learning how the paint stuff works, because then you can kind of make things look really neat, and when you add some animations there too. So that's why I took time to break it down and go back into it because I knew it had a lot to do with the paint.
Have you dealt
So.
with like I know sometimes there's a big disconnect between like managers or maybe even like UX team that think, oh,
Mhm.
this thing is simple and it should take
Mhm.
like a day.
Yeah,
What do you do when they expect something to take like a day, but of course it takes something like a week instead?
yeah. So my founder, where I'm working, awesome guy. I would love to talk about like my hiring process with them, but we'll go to this first. So he spent a lot of time on the Figma, on the design before we even touched the code. Um, and so I'm like, oh, I don't want to. He did a really good job, and he's very familiar with Flutter. So I think I have the pro there. He's also knows what's doable. But I've been surprised whenever I've come to him with a question. He always asks back questions to me of um, why are you asking this question? And then he and the senior developer, they will like link like, hey, this is how it should look. Here's a starting point for you. Here's some code, or here's an example. So they've made the design off of what they've researched with programming. So I haven't ran into that as much. But also when I ask a question, like that's like one of the first things he does. Like he goes in, he's like, I feel like he's trying to figure out, are you asking this because you're struggling to figure out how to do it, or it can't be done? And just really transparent and really kind. Like, and I say kind because like I've come from a background where like people generally only want to say, hey, I want to talk to you if I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
But like with where I'm at now, like Matt, like it is so awesome. Like it's just open, good communication. Like my boss, he'll be like, hey man, can we talk? And I'm like, oh crap, like what did I do? Like, am I getting fired today? And like he just wants to talk. Like he just wants to see how I'm doing. He just like, and not in like a time wasting manner, but just be like, hey, I'm checking in. Like, you work remote, we work together. How's things going? And I've been able to really open up with him about like, like PTSD, depression, instead of me acting like it doesn't exist. And when I'm having a bad day at work, him just thinking I suck. He's like, hey, like just let me know so we're on the same page. He's like empathy, and for me that's huge, because we always want to lead with our best foot. But if you're always leading with your best foot, you're walking really weird,
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so going back and forth with the design, there's been a few things, and since he's also the founder and the guy who did most of the designing, I kind of thought I'd like, but it hasn't felt like uncomfortable, and I think because we both had the same goal of like we want to get this built and get it right. I think he checks his ego at the door. He's never been like, well, this is what I did. I want it this way. He's like, well, we want to get a good product. So what's a good best product? And that's kind of why I decided I wanted to work with him, is because I got that feeling from him. Like it wasn't about him or his product. It was more about like, this is our team and this is what we are doing, and let's figure out the best way to do it.
That's really
Um,
cool. Shout out to Loop Messenger for being so like supportive of the growth of their developers and their team. I really love
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Um, so you mentioned you went straight to the founder to get the role at Loop Messenger.
hmm
Like, how did you find the company?
yeah. So um, I, I would like to say I have an entrepreneurial mindset, which maybe is just me having a lot of wishful thinking. I'm not sure maybe sometimes it's the same. But my brother, I have four brothers, and so when I say my brother, it's usually a different one every time. But
Okay.
um, it's not just one. But they all give me good advice, but not always just one. But he turned me on to a few startup websites. Angel.co was a big one. There's a few others, and I found them on there. I saw what they're doing. So at the time, I was building out some group chat features for an app I was working on, and I really so the my small company that I have, I'm building a gym app, but it's to build a community within a gym. So I really believe in community, through mental health struggles I've been through military stuff, through whatever. Like if I have a community around me, I can be successful. So with this gym app I'm developing, that's one thing I've been trying to build. And so when I saw that they're looking for a Flutter developer, and it's group messaging centric. And I read through it. I just, and he's from the same state, kind of same hometown area. I was like, oh man, like I want to work here, not I want a job. I want to work here, and that's the only places I've been applying, is places where like I felt that, because I can't do something I don't believe in, or at least want to be there. I've had job offers I've turned down because I just want to be there. Like but that's me. So I applied, but then I also sent him a direct message. It tells you who you're applying to, and I introduced myself. I said who I am. I said my background, and I told him why. Like I try to find common ground with him and say, well, this like I am junior, but I really like what you're doing. I took time to research the company, what they're doing. They have an app, and kind of just noted that stuff out. Like, hey, I've seen what you're doing. This is why I think I'd be a good fit because of what I'm doing already, so I can be an asset. Um, and his response initially was like, "Hey, man, like you're one of the only people that actually sent me a message." And on angel.co, it's really easy. There's other ways to find founders on different websites, but on there they make it pretty easy. And I was really shocked by that. And so that opened up a communication with us, and it it led to, well, I think you're more junior, but hey, let's talk and let's see where this goes. And that's happened a few times to me, and we talked. Um, and again, like awesome guy. The first two times we met, we didn't talk about tech coding, and we just talked. He wanted to get to know who I was, and I think he was a little wary because I have my military background, and he's like, well, we have guys from Denmark, from Australia, we have Middle Eastern guys. Like he has a pretty international team. It's pretty neat. And he's like, how will you work with these guys? Like, because we all have our kind of our conceptions of what we think people are like. And so it really made me feel good that he was more worried about how I was as a person before he even cared if I could program or not.
Yeah.
Um, and that made me like build up my expectations even more. So I'm like, oh man, if I don't get this position, like this is where I want to be, is somewhere that values this kind of type of stuff because of my background. Like I know where I do and don't want to be. So, and then we got to the technical stuff with a lead developer. He's out of Australia, and it was actually a really simple conversation. They didn't like get a whiteboard out. He just kind of asked me a few things, and they're like, hey, well, let's see where this goes. We'll teach you some stuff. We'll see how you do, and they gave me a chance.
And when you say ask you a few things, was it just Flutter related concepts or?
mhm. So we talked about Firebase. So I would say, like, as far as the tech part goes, it was a little abnormal. Generally, people want to talk about APIs, and then I think every interview I've got, it's like, how do you use API, parse data, and then here's an array. Can you reorder this array or this list? Um, but we talked about Firebase. If I've used Firebase, how I've used Firebase, how streams work in Flutter. How you can have a listener. It basically just a river of water flowing and putting in listeners. And then we talked about state management, because that's like, if you don't talk about state management in Flutter, then you probably don't know what Flutter is, or just programming. But yeah, and so it was more just kind of a conversation, and I think he just seen that I had experience in those things and I could learn. And then we kind of just started. They let me, so they were finishing up the design with where they were at the time, and they gave me the back end stuff we were working with and just said, hey, experiment with it for now. So probably the first few weeks I was with them, I was just doing my own thing and just kind of learning. And they expected that. They're like, hey, just start learning for now. And that was really neat because it allowed me to explore what they're doing, kind of play with stuff. And then when we are starting to rebuild some stuff, like I can just get going and contribute instead of feel like I'm just still kind of along for the ride. So it's been fun. It's been really fun because they are like, so I think with startups especially, they have a harder time bringing on people and wanting to teach them out the gate because they just don't have the bandwidth of the funds. And these guys are like, well, I think they believe that I could contribute, but they also knew I needed to learn, but I can learn. And that's important, is that you have that ability to learn. So, but
Yeah, I mean, I imagine your personality was a big selling point for them, just the culture fit.
yeah, I hope so. You know, um,
I mean, it's a small team, so it's even more
yeah,
important.
yeah. Well, and I've taught. So I had one company. Lizzie just said how like looking for the right fit is better than the tech first. So I had one company who they have a ton of money. They're gonna bring me on a pretty good point. The recruiter thought I was absolutely crazy, but I told him like I won't fit here. What their tech was around, like just ethically, like it just didn't jive with my background. And where I've kind of been in 14 years of my ethics and morals not jiving with what I did for a living. I knew I could do it, but I'm like, I just don't want to. And so when I met with these guys, like for me, that just felt good. And I sometimes you don't have that luxury. Sometimes like you just have to work and you need to make income. But in tech, I'm finding that that's like the norm, not the exception. At least in my experience, is most of the guys I've interviewed with, like they are good teams and they are looking for good people. They want people who can get the job done, but they also are looking for that culture. And so yeah, so I really lucked out because again, like with startups, they generally don't have that bandwidth to provide that. Um,
So
so
before you got the job at Loop Messenger, I'm sure you were going through a job hunt process.
yeah,
What do you wish is different about how that's set up for developers right now? Did you feel like your resume kept getting stuck, like in the ATS, like
yeah.
not going past that?
Um, so I don't haven't really I oh, it's such a big question.
Oh, sorry.
No,
What
it's
did
a
you dislike about
and
it, I guess?
and it's a good question. So my resume has 14 years of technical military experience. And I think generally that got me in the door almost every time, at least in the door. And I had some interviews with people like talk to me within 5 minutes or like, no, nah, sorry, man. Like they because I was junior, but having that resume, people see that I was a pilot, I was a combat pilot, a recon pilot. They're like, oh, let's talk to this dude. Um, so that really helped. And so that was something that I had an advantage of. So I think some of those systems, I remember some people would call me and be like, hey, it says you have 13 years of experience. That's awesome. We're looking for a principal engineer. And I'm like, oh, I have 13 years of work experience, but not programming. And so sometimes that hurt because I was just wasting everyone's time. Um, but something I would recommend people is early on, apply to a few places. So if you're starting a boot camp or you're in the middle or you're towards the end, like it's never too early to apply at least once or twice. And what I mean by that is, so I didn't do the shotgun effect of like 300, 400 applications, but the first time, and I told myself, the first time I think, hey, should I start applying? I just did. And I applied, I think, maybe 5 jobs. I got one interview out of it. And that interview taught me a lot. So I typically haven't applied at any big companies. So like with ATS and stuff, like I just haven't had a lot of experience. A few times it just gets kicked back. Um, I can talk some strategies there that I've learned with the military and government hiring. I think similar, but that first interview was really good for me because it gave me a very good check of where I am and what an interviewer is looking for. So I wasn't expecting to get hired, and I feel bad because I think sometimes I wasted their time. But it was a check for me to see where I'm at. And some things I was a lot closer. There's a lot of questions they asked, and I'm like, yeah, this, and this, and some things I'm like, yeah, man, I just like I don't know what that is. Sorry. Um, but then I got done and I wrote it all down. I'm like, okay, well, this is kind of what they're looking at, and this is where I was good or not good. And then I reattacked it. And a month or two later, I started applying to a few more. So that was kind of my process. And then when I was really serious about applying, um, so recruiters are really good. I haven't dealt with recruiters until I got into tech. And the first time a recruiter called me, I didn't understand that they didn't work for the company they were recruiting for. So when they were trying to ask me questions, I was trying to like nerd out, and they're
Yeah.
just like, I just need a yes or no. I'm like, and then I finally realized like their role and at what levels. So I wouldn't say I try to steer clear of recruiters, um, but I think researching where you want to go and then figuring out how to get there is a better way. So I would connect to people on LinkedIn who I saw had applied 100, 200 times. I made some really, really good friends this way, and we still talk. We're both employed. But I asked them, like, hey, how many times have you applied and what's working, what's not? And sometimes the people would respond, like, hey, are you hiring? I'm like, no, I'm not. And they just wouldn't talk to me again. And that spoke a ton. If you're only talking to people to get a job, it's not going to work. And then a few of them, we talked a ton and we shared a lot of experiences of what is working, what isn't. And what worked for me is I would research the companies I wanted to work for. I would download their app. I'd go to their website. I would see their mission statement. I would I would get on LinkedIn and kind of creep on the people who I'd probably be talking to. And I would do my research, and then I would tailor that resume, and I would send it off. And I would send it, if they had a LinkedIn job posting, I would send it to them. But then I would try and connect directly with one of those people and say, hey, this is who I am. And sometimes it works, and sometimes I got absolutely nothing. And that's just how that works. But that usually got me that first step of talking to someone a lot more than I think if I'd have just got 30 applications and sent them off every morning. So, it took a lot more time, and it was a lot, then when I got turned down, I think it hurt a little more. Um, but I felt like I've had more success overall. Um, I can say like usually about so if I was to like put in 5 resumes, I probably get a good response out of one. And I see people on the internet who are like, I put in 300 resumes, sent in 300 resumes, and got like 2 responses. I'm like, okay, well that just can't work. Like, or it
Yeah.
can, but it just so I try to
I
take a lot more um, of a direct and research it out,
I
and make it
definitely agree. I say be aggressive because I've
yeah,
experienced like doing the whole 100, 200 resume sending in. It feels bad. It doesn't
yeah,
feel good. And
yeah,
also you end up applying to places that maybe you don't really care about as much, and you also don't give as much energy to the ones that you do care about. I agree that
hmm,
it's great to LinkedIn stalk and to
yeah,
message people. I think that's
yeah,
really been beneficial for me as well.
yeah.
Um,
And
sorry, go ahead.
oh, I say, and the other thing I did, and this I didn't at the time, I didn't think about it, and now I need to I probably have to apologize to people who applied. But I have my own company on LinkedIn. I have like 4 followers. There's not really active, but I just wanted to see from a company perspective what LinkedIn looked like. I put up a job posting, and then I went through the process a little bit. So if no one's seen the other end of it, it was really eye opening to me of what someone actually sees when I apply to their position. So you're just a long list of people, right? So it's just name, 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 name. And then when they click on your name, all they see is like a quick snapshot of your profile on LinkedIn, and then just the top third of your resume if it's in PDF format. If it's not in PDF format, it just shows a Word link to download it. So make sure your resume is PDF, but then I've tailored my LinkedIn resume where that top third literally is like, stop reading, hire me now. Like big bold words. And and a few people have like commented on that. They're like, well, you have a weird resume. Why is it like that? And I told them like, I've seen it, and like you guys stopped and looked at it, right? And they're like, yeah, we did. I'm not saying like just say hire me now and 100 font, but if you're just if you can't on a screen glance at it and see what it is, when I was looking at people, I would just scroll right by. So seeing that end of it and taking that perspective of what an employer is looking for, I think is really big. I think a lot of people are like, "Why we can't get hired? What's your people who are hiring you? What's your problem?" Instead of, well, what are they really looking for?
That's really interesting insight from the other side. I did not know that.
So yeah, oh, I didn't, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, and I've tried to like share that on LinkedIn. I on LinkedIn I try to share some of the things I've learned that have like actionably helped me, and that was one that has really helped me is like what actually helps me stand out. Um, and I've really dug deep into why people have to apply 3 to 4 to 500 plus times to get a job, and I've tried to go against that. And I kind of mentioned earlier about stop making Twitter and Instagram clones. If there is a YouTube video that tells you how to do it 100%, well, that just means anyone else can do it that has time. So take it one step further or start creating your own stuff. And that, to me, is what is going to separate people. For me, specifically for Flutter, I recommend going to Flutter and mobile development. I've had a lot of recruiters call and say, hey, we just can't find Flutter developers. Like they'll have 20 applicants and only 5 are in the States and they can only hire stateside. And so for me, that's good. It's a newer technology and it might be here in 5 years, it might not. But I know there's a ton of web developers and most boot camps are centered around web development. And so you're just in a bigger pool. So that kind of, I think you asked earlier why mobile development. I like it, and I feel like it's a little more niche. Um, I feel like I'm betraying Apple a little bit by going with Flutter, but Flutter is really cool. So
And I imagine for people that aren't sure, they could try out React Native because you're kind of
Hmm.
learning React at the same time, just a little bit. It's kind of similar.
Yeah. So and this goes into like some of my first work. Um, I had someone who wanted me to do some React Native work. They saw what I was doing in Flutter, and they're like, "Hey, we have a React Native app. Can you come check it out?" So I'm a big advocate for contracting freelance work. Try to get small stuff. Like anything that you can get paid for is experience. My caveat though with it is I feel like you have to be transparent and honest with people you work with. There's been more times I've told people I don't think I can do that, but I will try, and they're like, "Yes, I will hire you." Or there's been job opportunities. I'm like, "Hey, I'm not a web developer. I can't do that." Or like I've done enough web development where like I could Google my way through some basic stuff. Um, but that straight up transparency and honesty like has gotten me so much further than just like, yeah, I'll figure it out and let you know. But with that being said, there's one guy who reached out. He wanted me to work in React Native. I told him no. He came back. I said, okay, well, I'll look at it. And the deal I had with him was because I didn't feel comfortable looking at something just to get paid to tell him I can't do it. I said, let me look at it first. Let me try and understand React Native. And if I can't do it, I don't want you guys to pay me. Um, and they felt comfortable with that. It made me feel a lot more comfortable. That's whenever I do any contract or freelance work, I always lead with that. I say I will not pay you for any of the learning I have to do. That's not like pretty standard. And if I can't do it, I will tell you, and you won't pay me, and I will find someone else who can for you. And people really, I feel like they appreciate that because um, people just want trust. I think that builds trust. And I, yeah. Anyways, so I looked at React Native and I didn't like it. I think React Native's a really good. Long story short, I think React Native's a really good spot to be in because if you're a web developer, it follows a lot of the same format. And so it's really easy. It's really easy to read because of that when I was looking at it because of the web development stuff I've done. Um, but as it kind of made me feel better about being in Flutter. Flutter to me just is a lot more simpler. But I spent a few months learning Flutter. I tried to learn React Native in a weekend, so I didn't give it a really good shot either. So I can't be a huge advocate one way or another. So if you're quoting me later, know that that is the comparison there. But yeah, React Native would be a good spot for web developers, or Ionic. I think
Yes, you can
I looked.
also write in React and
Yeah,
Ionic, I think.
I looked at Ionic over the weekend. I have a lady who reached out to me. She has an app she's trying to maintain in Ionic, and so I looked at it, and it's the same way there too. I think that it's built after HTML and CSS. So
So I know that we're coming up on the end of the hour. Do you have more time? Because I feel like I have more questions.
sure, yeah,
So one of the questions from our community um, was basically how were you able to persevere through this field, which is constantly changing, and how did you get past moments of wanting to quit, if you've ever had them?
yeah. So my life has been one big do something stupid hard and then move on, and then do something hard again. So I like in the military, like it was just over and over and over. So I think I had that benefit of knowing I could do hard things. For instance, I failed out my freshman year in college flying. Like I was scared to fly. I didn't want to fly. I failed the class. Fast forward 6 years, I'm now a professional pilot in the Navy, flying overseas combat missions. So that experience kind of pushed me like, okay, I can do other hard things. If I didn't have those experiences, I would say it'd be a lot harder. I have a family. I'm married with 4 kids, and I need to make money and have a job and a career. So that was like another motivating factor. And so because I've had those days, I still have those days. I would say I had one of those days 2 days ago. I'm glad we're talking on Friday and not Wednesday. Wednesday I probably would have bailed out. Um, I had to sit and go, and I had to look at the truths without getting like into what my beliefs are, but the truths of life. And I think if you can sort out what the truths are, like why am I doing this? What's the purpose? And have other people done this? That's big to me. And if the only thing telling you you can't is your own self doubt, well, you can be very, very reassured that you can do it because if there's nothing else telling you can't do it other than yourself, well, you're always wrong. And that's what I've learned. And so if I can sit there and lay out the truth in front of me of like why I can or can't do something, if the only thing telling me is my own self-doubt and I have no like really like solid evidence of like even like with massive failures in front of me, like you can overcome any kind of failure, I think. But if it's just my own self-doubt, I've learned that okay, well that's just telling me I can, and my own brain's telling me I can't because it's wrong. So that's what I do, and it's a lot of retrospection. Hopefully that kind of answered that.
Yeah.
Um, I have to, but it's hard. I think the joy of the tech community and also the weaknesses is all on social media, and people generally post about the pros. I will say yesterday, so like I talked a little bit about my mental health. I've been pretty open with my boss, and he's been super cool. But like yesterday, like I just couldn't work. Like it was just a bad day for me for one reason or another, and it comes back. I had to do the same thing, but I think I had to come back and say, okay, well, what's next, and that move forward mentality too. If you're a newer programmer and it's really hard, well, it's supposed to be hard. People just generally don't share their suffering, um, but you just have to know like 1 inch at a time will get you through. So
And it's okay to take a break. Like, it's
it
okay to
is,
step away from the computer
yeah,
before you
yeah,
murder your screen.
yeah. And and when I first started, I thought I had to study all the time, and that was good. But then I realized like, it's not sustainable. Like, yeah, you have to, and it's hard. So
So I did want to ask you some plane questions.
yeah.
What kind of aircrafts did you fly?
So I've flown a few. I started off in a T6, which is just a little two-seater trainer airplane, kind of like a jet trainer. So it's propelled with a propeller, not jet engines. But and then I went to a King Air type aircraft and that's like a six-passenger aircraft. And then I flew something called the P3. Um, most people know what a C-130 a C-130 is. A P3 has the same engines as a C-130. They're upside down, and it's a reconnaissance plane instead. Um, and so I flew that was like what I flew my main platform. We flew with a crew of about 24 to 26 people. Um, I was the aircraft commander, the mission commander. I was, like the guy. I was one of the
Okay.
three guys on the plane. Not always, but that's what I ended as. And it was pretty neat. Um, and it was what was really neat about it is when we deployed, it was me and that team and no one else generally. And so even though like I was higher on that food chain, like you could kind of throw that out the window a little bit and just really work really well together and get on everyone's level on the same level. So, but then I did that, and then after I was done with that, uh, kind of deployed all over the world with that. Came back, and I was fought to get an instructor position to keep flying, and I've come back down to Florida and been doing that. So, and that's back in the T6, but now as an instructor. So,
Do you have a favorite aircraft?
um, so anything that someone's paying me to fly would have been my favorite. Um, but the P3 was really fun. So the replacement for it came in, and it was all autopilot and automated, but we stuck with a legacy aircraft, and it was more of a pilot's plane. Um, and that was fun because like you were really flying that plane, and we did some really cool training with that plane. So I would say by far the P3. The actual P3 that I did my first check ride in is in a museum now, so it tells you how old the plane is. But it was by far um, probably my favorite, and really cool, really neat airplane.
Lorraine left a really sweet message, thanking you for the talk about mental health. And I just want to say, like, he's been in the military for 13 years and doing tough stuff, and this is still difficult for him. Like,
Yeah.
programming is difficult, so no one should beat themselves up.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And that's what like so like with mental health, um, it is hard because you think you're the only one, and then you see a bunch of other people being successful. So like whatever part of mental health you struggle with, like it just brings you down. It just says, no, you can't do this. And it's taken me a long time to like address the issues. Actually, it took me to the point where like I couldn't function. Um, but then learning like it's a part of you, and if you handle it and you take time out for it, then like you can turn around and be successful. I know there's a lot more people. I've generally stayed away from social media. When I got back into tech, I came back into it. But it's been neat to see like people actually like address it and say, hey, like I am taking a day for myself. Like you need to take a break. And I think the world I grew up in as a kid is completely different now. Like as a kid, it just wasn't talked about. It was stigmatized out the window. And now like I can openly talk to my boss about it, and like he's like, hey man, like cool, let me know and we'll work around it, instead of like, ooh, um, it's out there. And I think more people struggle at some level, whatever it is. I think at some level people, even if you just want to call it stress, like stress is hard and you need to handle it appropriately, even if it's not a mental health issue per se, like it affects you. So I don't like to like lay it all out there because I have a lot of unique struggles, but I do like to be like, hey, I do struggle, and that's okay, and so do others. Um, and yeah, like I was a mission commander and aircraft commander on airplanes, and programming's still really hard to learn. Like I'm glad you said that, because it is like it's hard no matter who you are, no matter how smart or not. It is really hard, but it's also really doable with
Yeah.
persistence. So
Yeah, just be kind to yourself. I also have noticed that companies are trying to start like unlimited paid time off so that when
yeah,
you need a mental health day, you can take it.
yeah,
So I would definitely look out for
yeah.
places that are offering that.
Yeah, I had a really good friend. We met on LinkedIn, and we were both trying to get hired, and he got brought onto a company that's like that, and he loves it. They're like, I talked to him, like he went from a really bad work environment to a really good one, and it's been so fun to see that transition for him. And one of those things that he's like, as long as I get my work done, like I can take those days when I need to. So
Yeah, and I imagine most people do better work when they're able to take those
to,
days.
yeah, well, yeah, I've gone into work some days when I'm pretty unhappy and I just wasn't productive, like you know.
Yeah.
So
Do you have any, sorry, going back to
no, go ahead.
military stuff, do you have any favorite locations that you've flown into?
Oh man. So I was really lucky. We always deployed to a hotel on an island. So we always saw some really, really neat areas. Um, so to the places of Japan and Greece, we were on Okinawa and on Crete, and they were just yeah. Every time I flew home, after a mission. Like those places were awesome. They just I remember Crete. So they have some like the world's beautiful beaches there, most beautiful beaches there, and we would hike to them. And then the next day when we flew home, we'd fly by the cliffs and like fly right by those beaches and then go home and land. And like it was just surreal. Like it was like kind of like one of those things. Like every day you're like, oh, I can't get sick of this. Like this is cool. And we so yeah, those areas are really cool. I like Japan a lot more than I thought I would have. I kind of went there with my own notion of what Japan was, and it was completely blown away. Like the people and the culture and the community is really really neat. Um, Probably that was probably my most favorite. I went there to two different times, and those were probably my most favorite deployments because of the area.
Sorry, I might be saying this wrong. Is Okinawa the island that has all the cats on it? I know there's like a
Yeah.
cat island. It is?
Well, shoot, I don't know. So Okinawa is like really really south. It's like the Hawaii of Japan.
Mhm.
I don't know if they have like you're like talking about like real cats.
Like there's a cat island in Japan. Like basically there's a
Oh,
ton of stray cats just walking around.
I don't think that's there. I don't know.
Yeah, that's where I want to go.
Yeah.
Did you hear about the I know this was a controversy in the pilot community recently. Did you hear about the Trevor Jacob incident?
Mm-mm.
So basically Trevor's engine like stopped midair and instead of landing the plane, he decided to jump out of it and allowed the plane
Mm.
to crash into the mountain.
Yeah.
So that was a huge controversy, and a lot of pilots were
Interesting.
upset. But there's a video of him, like another pilot reenacting that scenario, but in Microsoft Plane Simulator, and how
Oh
he
yeah.
could have handled it. Have you played
Yeah.
Microsoft Plane Simulator?
Yeah, a little bit. Um, so where maybe the question's going. So if that dude survived, he made the right decision. And
Yeah.
that's kind of, and in the military, that's how like we usually looked at like situations, and like you're the one there, you're the one under the stress, and like if you brought home everyone safe, and it was like a good decision, um, like maybe there was a better decision, maybe he could have, but at the end of the day, like at least for me, I'm like my decisions will bring me home safely, so they're good decisions. There was a point in my life where I thought like flying was everything. And so a lot of my decisions were like, well, how would people perceive this if I landed and I did this? And then I would make decisions off of that. Um, and looking back, I wish I would have been like, okay, flying's not life. What's the best thing here? The actual best thing. And generally, they usually lined up. But we had a few of those, different emergencies or different things like that where, um, like you kind of have to, like one of our procedures is to jump out of our airplane. Generally, we would only have done that if our wings were falling off and we were falling out of the sky. But it's there, and at the end of the day, like my goal is always to get everyone home safe and alive, and I guess people afterwards, they can, kind of quarterback it all they want. But if I'm alive, like I don't care.
That's fair. That's a fair take, I
uh,
think.
and yeah, like, and that's after I've had these kind of discussions for years, and maybe I'm a little bitter with it, but because people will always double guess you. But in the situation with the stress, like if especially flying, where you will always land the airplane at least once, right? Like as long as you go up, you have to come down, but just making sure you come down safely. And I would never criticize someone if they thought what they're doing was the safest thing, and they came out alive. Like you can replace the airplane, and I have to look into that one specifically, so I can't really talk to that. But generally, for me, is like if you come home safe and it was common sense, like okay, maybe some situations weren't like you can't fly again, but like it's not the end of the world, and you're still alive. So
That's fair. He might be getting a little too much hate, considering it's a
yeah,
stressful situation, I imagine.
yeah, people love to hate. People love to hate.
Well, thank you for staying over the
Yeah.
hour, so a little over an hour with us. Is there anything that you want to shout out before we end the stream, like your socials?
So first, just with the company I'm with, like, um, check out their app on the App Store. It's not quite there yet. We're releasing a new version here in a little bit, but I support who they are, so I support the company, and not just because I work there. I'm on LinkedIn. I think you can find my company, Space Mule Code, or me, just Zach Smith. I have a little like emojicon avatar. Space Mule Code on Twitter or Instagram as well. Um, Follow me or not, but if you have questions, ask them. I always try to respond. I don't do anything paid. I don't try to like loop you into a newsletter. I just try to help people because people help me. Um, because like eventually you'll be in this position, and that's how I've always seen it. Is like have people help you and then turn around and help people. So I'm in the position where I'm still getting help, but I also can maybe help someone. So uh, reach out, and ask whether it's mental health stuff, aviation, programming, or how to be a bad dad. I'm trying to learn how to be a good dad still, but
Are they
but
alive?
they are.
Then I think you're doing good.
Yeah, they are.
That's success in
So,
itself.
but and then in 5 years from now, I'll be ruling the world, and we can all rule it together. So,
Well,
but
thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. If you're in the chat or if you're watching this video, definitely go check out his socials. Adam, if you have questions, he says that he's available for
yeah,
mentorship, and I think
yeah,
that's great. Also, join the Bit community, the Slack, if you want to check out the future AMAs or follow Pathlight on Twitter. And thank you so much. Bye, guys.
yeah. See ya. Thanks for having me.